Welcome to the Surrogates Corner with James Mahan. Hello and welcome to the Surrogates Corner with James Mahan. James passionately advocates for surrogates, providing practical legal guidance to surrogates and donors throughout their journeys. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about what to do when things get complicated, high-risk pregnancies, and emergency legal protections. James, welcome back. Good to see you.
Thanks, Kevin. Always great to be with you.
All right, so what happens when a surrogate is diagnosed with a high-risk pregnancy, and who decides what makes a pregnancy high risk?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Usually once the surrogate is pregnant, around week 8 or 9, they're going to be released to their OB to kind of manages the rest of their maternal care. It's realistically not until about 13 or 14 weeks that we start doing some tests, that we start looking at, what's going on developmentally. Is there an issue with, what the ultrasounds are telling us, or blood spike levels that we're worried about. And so the medical team is usually going to manage what's going on and kind of where they feel like they're comfortable. Now, there are instances where intended parents have different views as to what, meets the threshold of a high-risk pregnancy. I mean, obviously kind of your big ones like a gestational diabetes, hemorrhage, something like that. That's kind of like everyone agrees, like, we're just at risk for pregnancy. Yeah. And usually there, we're going to start getting into the MFMs or going to go see some specialists. So that tends to be where we go, is just strictly on a medical indicated basis of what's going on. Is the OB, or sometimes it's a midwife, like, are they comfortable handling whatever it is, or does it need to be kicked up to somebody else? So a lot of times it's going to be a medical recommendation that we are at high risk. We need to bring in additional people or additional resources to help with that. Or sometimes we need to go get some additional testing to figure out what we're actually seeing.
Okay. And from a contract viewpoint, how is the medical decision-making addressed in a typical surrogacy contract in case there are complications?
Yeah, the default is going to say that, the surrogate agrees that whatever her medical team recommends, thinks they should do, suggests about testing, screening, seeing a specialist, like, they're going to do. So there are very, very rare circumstances where a doctor is telling a surrogate, like, hey, there's something going on with your pregnancy, we have to do this test. And they're just like, no, I don't want to. There are instances where I've seen some things where, like, parents are just very nervous about embryo quality or something else, and they want to do an amniocentesis at like 13 weeks, regardless of whether the doctor thinks it's a good idea or not. Usually those are instances where we want to say either the surrogate agrees to do that, or only if her doctor doesn't object to it or thinks it's a bad idea, because we don't want to risk a pregnancy that is not already high risk for things that may not be very fruitful to us. So that tends to be where a lot of that will come into play. The surrogate, it's her body, it's her pregnancy, so she's kind of got to be in the driver's seat for agreeing to most of these things. But the contract, will kind of nudge her in the direction of, if your provider thinks you need this or suggests it, you're at least willing to do the test and kind of find out what may or may not be going on.
Okay. And in a case of an emergency, and you can't reach the intended parents, who has authority?
With all contracts, really, but usually it's going to be an OBC something. We have, to go get it looked at again. We're going to schedule an appointment in 2 or 3 days. There's time to at least, like, text, notify, hey, I'm going back in 3 days. The other ones where we have, like, surrogates going to the ER, they have hemorrhage issues or something else. We don't have time to, some of the IPs are international. They're across multiple time zones. Like, we can't really wait for them to chime in as to what they want the surrogate to do. In those instances, the contract will say, if it's a medical emergency and there's no time to contact or get in touch with the IPs, basically the surrogate is on her own to kind of make decisions that she needs to. We usually have the intent of erring on the side of, like, save surrogate, save baby, right? So do everything you can. In terms of life-threatening events or emergencies, we always have a priority for carrier first or surrogate first, and then baby second, which sounds difficult for some parties to kind of deal with that. But we want the surrogate to know, like, hey, we're not going to sacrifice you for baby, or you have the ultimate right to say what you do or do not want to have happen to your body, and we can deal with ramifications to that later. But if we don't have time, the surrogate's going to make the recommendation or make the decision based on the recommendation from her medical team and from her doctors. And usually there's no way for the parents to kind of go after her for doing that if she's following kind of that medical recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense because, if a surrogate was told, hey, if there's complications, we're saving the baby first. I mean,
right.
Most surrogates would be like, well, I'm not doing that. I mean,
right.
Like, come on. Yeah. I mean, I want to help you, but I don't want to die,
Exactly. And there's, the surrogates kind of know we talk about assumption of risks, and there are risks to being pregnant, and then there's just the natural, pregnancy risks that are there. And for a woman who's getting pregnant and carrying her own baby, there's obviously going to be a little bit more of a, not a buy-in, but kind of like a, hey, this is, what I want to do. But for the
Yep.
surrogate, we want them to know, like, when push comes to shove, like, we are looking after you first and after babies, hopefully with being able to save you and save baby. That's what everybody wants. But in the event that we have to kind of choose, we're not going to choose the baby over the surrogate.
So in that kind of same thing, we talked about if the intended parents can't be reached, what if they can and there's a disagreement with how to move forward?
If there is a disagreement and there is time, because a contract will almost always say, if there's time to get, this is where we have like our second opinion clauses. Like if we have time to go get another party to look at this, if we have time to go see a different specialist or, find out what this indication really means, then we will do our best to do that. If there is no time, or if the surrogate's provider thinks there is no time to do that, then she's going to make a decision like right then and there with her doctor, and that's pretty much it.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned the second opinion clause. When does that is that clause in the initial contract?
Yeah, so it's going to be in the main contract between the surrogate and the intended parents. We'll talk about how medical is going to be provided for, what insurance policy we're going to plan on using, how the maternal care is meant to kind of go. And usually it's going to say she gets to choose her provider as long as they're in network and kind of covered by the insurance policy that we have. We want the surrogates, if the option is there, for them to have kind of ownership of who they're seeing, who their OB is, to have that kind of personal relationship with them. And a lot of surrogates will use the OBs that cared for them during their own pregnancies. Like we love it when that option is there. Some instances where a surrogate needs a new insurance policy, she might have a new list of providers, they may have moved recently and they can't use a provider that they know. They're going to just go to somebody that's kind of on their list of in-network providers. But we often want to have in there, what happens if either the parents, because a lot of times from the parents' perspective, it's, well, I may not agree with what the midwife or the OB thinks that we should do, and I don't want to be completely unable to, have input or say for what should happen. So the second opinion clause says either party, surrogate or IP, if they don't like what the recommendation is medically from the primary physician, whether that's the midwife or OB, either can ask to get a second opinion to have somebody else look at it. If there is a second opinion request, the contract will usually push the financial liability of who pays for that second opinion to the party requesting it. So if the parents don't like an OB recommendation and they want the surrogate to go see their specialist or their doctor or someone they like, and I've seen this where they will fly a surrogate from, Montana to Seattle to go see the one that they like in Seattle, that's fine, but the parent is going to pay for the logistics, the flight, the appointments, and all that kind of stuff that's not covered by insurance. So that is available to us. And then the follow-on, the next clause, usually in that second opinion provision, will say, well, what happens if there is actually a medical disagreement? What do we do when like the OB says, no, don't do the test, and parents' OB says, yes, you should? That's usually where we'll see there be like the referee come in, where it's a third physician selected by both parties. They kind of say, what does OB say? What does the other person say? And then they kind of make their recommendation. And at some point, we kind of have to end this rat race. So that usually will say, whatever that third physician decides, like we're going to go with that.
Oh, and I'm sorry if I missed this when you said it initially. Who picks the third referee? I think you called him referee. Yeah.
Yeah. Usually we will say that the specialist that the IPs like, or the second opinion doctor and the primary opinion doctor will mutually select kind of a third person to referee it. There are some instances where it will just say, look, we don't really have the time to kind of go back and forth. And so sometimes they'll say, hey, whatever the second opinion doctor says, if it's different from the primary, we're just going to go with the second opinion doctor. It can be okay. Sometimes it's a little bit weaker protection for the surrogate, because if the IPs can yank you and have you go see the doctor that they really like, and that maybe is going to, kind of just, yeah, that makes sense, go ahead and do that. You might get some differences. So I like it when there's a neutral, mutually selected referee physician that decides, but sometimes that's not what the contract will say.
Right. How do you guide surrogates through this emotional and medically complex journey? I mean, there's so many moving parts. We have a kid. I've seen pregnancy. I've seen problems and complications. They pop up, they can pop up very quickly.
Right.
How do you help guide? That's got to be kind of tough.
It is. And I don't relish it. I enjoy when I get the opportunity to help someone through a difficult time.
Sure.
I never hope or pray for that on any of the surrogates. I want all of them to have smooth, uncomplicated pregnancies, but like you said, they happen, and they can happen at any point in time for random reasons, for things that are completely beyond her control or the IP's control. And the difficult part is that at contract, where a lot of this stuff is discussed, it's the rose-colored glasses. Like everything's great. We're gonna get pregnant on the first transfer. We're gonna have a perfect 9-month baby. It's gonna be awesome. And it's like, okay, that's what we hope for, but what do we do when that doesn't happen?
Right.
And this is where an agency versus an independent match become kind of important. What kind of support network does the surrogate have for that journey when things do start getting strange? I've had issues where a surrogate will do a single embryo transfer and she'll kind of pop with twins, and now we have a slightly more complicated twin pregnancy, and we're doing MFM appointments, and there's just a lot more going on to deal with that. And if you're handling that in a vacuum or by yourself, it can be, both emotionally and physically draining. So luckily, the agencies, if they're involved, they're kind of part of that shepherding process to bring that through. But I mean, I have a lot of independent matches and a lot of surrogates who are with agencies that just don't kind of get that TLC, that loving care about what's going on and what to do. And they do come to me and they say, hey, this is happening. Like, I've got this appointment. I don't know what to do. I'm freaking out. And we'll kind of go through and say, well, look, this is what your contract says we need to do. These are kind of the steps we have to do. You can't make a decision yet. We need to go through A, B, C, D before we get there. So take a deep breath. Let's just get the first one done and then kind of see what can happen. And I have found that they just want someone that can say, hey, you're okay. We're going to make this work. We're going to follow the guidelines that we need to, and we'll get to the decision eventually that we need to make. And sometimes that will be a decision that they get complete control over. And sometimes it will be a decision that the doctors get to decide, but we'll get there through a process. And once they know, like, okay, someone's listening, someone's looking at this, there is a process, that alone can kind of give a little bit of peace and ease as to how do we deal with whatever's going on. And if it's not an emergency, those are great, because that's when we get to kind of do that. When it's an emergency situation, usually they're not calling me until after they've already made the decision, because there's just no time to, radio the attorney when they're like, let's just get the doctor's opinion.
Right. Yeah, totally. Totally. No, but that makes sense though. They just need to be reminded that they have an advocate, they have someone in their corner helping them, and they're not alone.
Right. And that, I mean, like I said, that we've talked about this a number of times, Kevin, with different, episodes that we've done, but like that was the whole premise behind why I wanted to structure my firm the way that it is. There's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of kind of guidance. The IPs are the parents of the baby. A lot of times they have the resources available to go and get a lot of stuff. Some of my surrogates are hoping the agency's involved, hoping that, their doctor is kind of looking out for them. But I mean, sometimes the agency is a little bit aloof. The doctor's kind of new and doesn't really have any investment in them personally, or their background, or this pregnancy for them. And so just knowing that they have that access to me and they can come back and say, hey, James, what do I do? And, and I don't like to play doctor, and I never do, but, sometimes they'll get to me with things that are not really legal questions. They're more just medical questions. But at least we can kind of talk through, like, hey, this is what the doctors are going to do. This is what information we're going to get from whatever they decide. And then once we have that information, we can then start to make a legal decision based off of what, information we're gathering and what kind of direction we're being pushed in. But just that knowledge of, like you said, there is someone I can go back to. I can go out my own, but if it starts getting rough, like, at least I know I can kind of come back to my corner and figure out, like, okay, what should I do? And then go back out there and continue the fight or continue the pregnancy. And that's what I love to do.
So in a situation where a surrogate refuses a test or treatment, you mentioned that the third party, or the referee, are there liabilities that she takes on for the refusal? Are there issues that she could have based on the contract that was made?
Yes, there are. And sometimes we will try to put into the contract, if there are hard no's for a surrogate, then we want them in the contract so they're already kind of baked into the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm.
Absent that, the contract will say, if the surrogate refuses a medical recommendation or goes against, medical advice, and there are resulting complications, defects, issues with the pregnancy, they could be liable not only for potentially the loss of their future, compensation and payments and everything else, but they may have to reimburse or pay back into the parents for whatever damage that they actually caused.
Wow.
Now, where that gets a little bit tricky is the contracts will say this is kind of who makes decisions, and in the absence of that decision, who gets who's on the hook for it. There are a lot of statutes, though, especially in the states that have newer surrogacy laws, that very clearly say, like, the surrogate gets to make all decisions regarding her pregnancy, the embryo, and whatever she wants to do. And the contract can't really deny her that authority, that decision-making authority. We haven't had that come to a head yet in terms of a challenge for those things. I'm sure eventually it will, but especially in those states where there is that kind of protection, you see this in, like, the New York Surrogate Bill of Rights. The Washington Code has got a lot of this. The Idaho Code that just came out is similarly will say that, we want to make sure the surrogate knows that they have the ability to make most of these decisions, and we can't make them hugely financially liable for, doing something that they feel is in their best interest, even if the other party doesn't. So we'll see where that goes, and there may be some cases and learnings on that from or lessons learned from issues where that comes to a head. But we just kind of deal with that sort of in the abstract right now as to what does the contract say could happen, and then what realistically legally will happen if this goes to some kind of dispute resolution.
I would imagine that someone who's a repeat surrogate would definitely have some conditions that maybe a newbie wouldn't, because they've been through it and they're like, okay, I know how this goes. This is something I want to add in this contract because I've been there before.
Right. And then, or they've seen it, like I had a bad experience with this IP who wanted, to do all these different tests. I mean, I had one like last week where, part of her compensation was meant to cover like copays and other expenses. And she's like, I had an IP who wanted me to go see an MFM, and I was doing appointments every week and I was responsible for my copays. So I blew through like that monthly allowance because I was doing 6 appointments, in a month. And that's just not what it was intended for. So we struck out that this does not cover those things, and those are responsible out, in other ways. And then some circuits, like, I just want to make sure that tests that are needed are only done, not if the IP is requested, but only if there's a medical indication. So there's definitely some things there, especially on the medical side of who gets to make decisions, that we will say, yes or no to, because like I said, most of the contracts will say, if the medical team thinks you need this, then you're willing to do it. Or if the IPs request it, you're willing to do it. And usually on that or clause, we will tack on, and it's not medically objected to by your physician, right? So some of the 50-50 calls, like, I may not want to do a blood test, or I may not want to do the amnio, but if there is, a slight concern, if there is an embryo, history issue that they're worried about, and the doctor says, look, I get it, it could go either way, then we're going to say yes. But if the doctor's like, no, this does not make sense for you or for the pregnancy, and I would not do it, then she's going to say no, and then we kind of kick into the second opinion clause at that point.
Okay. What is your message generally to surrogates who might be worried about how they'll be supported if things don't go as planned, or if there's emergencies?
I guess my biggest thing would be, the contract, and the default intent of the contracts is you do what you need to do to safeguard and protect your health and well-being. Again, that's almost verbatim for what a lot of the statutes will say. And even in the states that don't have statutes, the contract is almost going to always say, like, the surrogate needs to be able to protect herself when these things come up. If you get to a situation where it's not this is going to be extremely harmful for me or medically detrimental to my long-term health and well-being, it's just a thing I don't want to do, then I would say know that there are options for you. You don't have to make decisions like in real time, in the next 5 minutes. Go talk to your agency, go talk to your physician about what the request is, go talk to your attorney or come call me, and figure out what maybe you have options are to do, because the contract does not want people to make rash medical decisions around a pregnancy, either for the health of the surrogate or for the health of the baby.
Yeah, that doesn't benefit anybody.
Yeah. So there are safeguards that are there. Sometimes you just have to dig for them a little bit. And I think just knowing that there is the option or the ability to go to somebody who knows where to dig and get those nuggets of information for you is very helpful. And it can make that whole process of the anxiety and the concern over a medical complication or medical issue feel more manageable when you realize that, you have a team working on this with you and you're not just on your own out there.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for tuning into the Surrogates Corner with James Mahan. To connect with James, visit surrogatescorner.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Leave us a review. We got lots of great information on our channel and more to come. James, always great chatting with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.